Good morning and welcome to Sharpe Takes Episode 5. I am delighted this morning to have the Executive Director of the Vermont NEA, Jeff Fannon, with us. Jeff graduated the University of Vermont and Georgetown University Law School. Jeff has been practicing labor law for more than 20 years, representing labor unions and their pensions and health plans. In his capacity as Vermont NEA General Counsel, Jeff's practice included representing various local education association and members in grievances and before the Vermont Labor Relations Board and Vermont courts. Additionally, Jeff is a lobbyist representing Vermont NEA teachers and support staff members in the Vermont State House and in numerous public policy settings. For example, he's on the commission to study public education currently. Prior to joining Vermont NEA in 2001, Jeff was general counsel for the Vermont Healthcare Administration. Before moving to Vermont in 1999, Jeff was an associate attorney with the law firm of Mooney Green in Washington, D.C., where he represented various international unions and their pension and health plans, including the Marine Engineers Beneficial Association, the United Mine Workers of America, the Seafarers International Union, the Teamsters, and the American Radio Association. That's quite a resume, Jeff. Welcome to the show.
I think it's just a testament to my age more than anything.
I'm delighted to have you here. Why don't you start us out and help us in our goal of understanding where we're at with education, where we want to be, how we're going to get there, and how we're going to pay for it.
Well, first off, thank you very much, Dave, for having me here. It's good to see you again, and we miss you in the State House, and your time there was enjoyable and intellectually curious for both of us, and it was fun to be around you. So thanks for your service back then, and thanks for doing this TV show now. It's
Thank you.
Kind of
I
cool.
think we got some good things done when I was in the legislature, and now we have a new crisis to tackle.
Well, I don't know if it's a crisis. It's an ever evolving system, education is, and hopefully we make growth as do students and educators and schools, and now we're bumping into some financial hurdles that we have to get over and around and to deal with. So that's big.
And regarding that, I think the Vermont NEA has a proposal with regard to finances.
We do. We've long thought that we should move to an income tax with which for residents to pay their education tax. But before that, you can't just flip the switch to that. We think that we want to, right now, what people are suffering and calling out for is relief from the property tax. We did some polling on this before the election. 7 out of 10 Vermonters very much support their public schools, and it's their top priority when they pay taxes. They think of it as a really important thing for which they pay taxes, so they support their public schools. Also, they don't like their property taxes. They pay too much, and so the other information there is that we've gleaned is that it's the system, the property tax system that residents pay, that they really are concerned about. And we think that there's a better way to do it, have been long advocating for that. And in the immediate moment, what we're saying is use the current system that's in place, the property tax for residents. We think that you can, some of these numbers, some of the adjustments in the system haven't been updated years and years. And so they haven't been adjusted for inflation. So the $47,000 circuit breaker number hasn't been adjusted in years. The $90,000 threshold for income sensitivity hasn't been adjusted in years. And so those need to keep up with inflation as well. There are property values that attach to those. So if you earn $90,000 and your house is worth more than $400,000, which many homes have increased in value of late, you not only would you pay, if you're under $90,000, you would pay a percentage of your income. You would then also pay a percentage or a property tax on the value over $400,000. So you're getting double tax, and it's really hitting the middle class really hard right now. So our proposal would have us adjusting those cliffs. We worked with Public Assets Institute to examine that and update those numbers. So if you bring the 47,000 up to 60,000, and the 90,000 up to inflation adjusted 130,000, you protect 50,000 Vermonters from the added effects of paying an income and a property tax, which is what they're doing now. That would be about $50 million, and we think that there are some ways to insulate them, anybody, from that, and if you will, and one of the ways to do that is to examine the education. So the second part of the proposal is, let's look at what the Ed Fund is paying for now. And the Commission on the Future of Public Education, to which you alluded, is going to do that. We haven't really done much of that yet. We haven't gotten there. I think we will. But we think at Vermont NEA that making sure the Education Fund is paying for education is a priority, and it was when Act 60 was passed and Act 68 was passed. But we've grown. There have been things that have been added to the Education Fund. So, for example, in 2018, teacher pensions were added to the Education Fund, and while the number was small then, it has been growing by, knowingly. People knew that the number there is called the normal cost. The legacy expenses for teacher pension still remain in the general fund, but should we pull out that, that's about $50 million this year. So if we pull that out, you can provide the immediate tax relief for middle-class Vermonters, about 50,000. That's great. And you'd pull out, say, for example, pensions, the normal cost of pensions. Or you could examine, schools have been paying a great deal more for mental health for students. That's known. The Agency of Education in the spring said it was between $50 and $60 million increase this year for mental health. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons why is the state's mental health system has really collapsed in the last 5 years after the pandemic. And so schools are left picking up the pieces for a system that's collapsed over here that used to be paid out of the general fund. The Education Fund is now paying for it. Well, is that right? We don't think it is, perhaps, and it at least should be examined. And so I think there are other ways to increase or decrease how much the Ed Fund is paying for. For example, you could have a separate, right now we have two taxes. We have the residential property tax rate and the non-residential property tax rate. In many states, not many states, but other states, they have multiple varies of other taxes. And so, for example, we could bifurcate the non-residential tax rate, which currently applies to businesses and non-residents, and we could separate those two and have second homeowners and third homeowners and fourth homeowners paying a different rate than our commercial folks who are trying to run a business in Vermont and trying to make, and they do great things there. And so maybe we should separate the two, the non-residential tax rate for a home versus commercial. And we could do that, and we think that would increase funds to the Ed Fund.
Several interesting
and
thoughts.
By the way, it concludes with going to the income tax.
Oh,
so it's a three-step proposal.
Proposal, yeah. So several interesting things. One is common ground, which is going to be incredibly difficult to find, I think, going forward, and trying to solve the problems that we see in delivering quality education and paying for it. And you mentioned about mental health, and Scott Beck on this program suggested the same thing, that mental health, that schools are in session 175 days for 7 hours a day, and you're dealing with mental health problems. There are 365 days a year, and they're 24 hours a day. And so to ask schools to solve this problem, that's a year-long, day-long problem with a schedule that's neither year-long nor day-long, is ridiculous. And that what we ought to have is the mental health system taking care of those problems or addressing those problems. So there's a little bit of common ground there.
Yes, I think so. It sounds like I have not seen the program with Scott. I mean, maybe I should have watched it if it's on yet, and I will. But Scott has been, known Scott for years. He's been in the House, not as you work with you, I think, and now in the Senate. And we will work with whomever to improve the system so that kids' needs are served and they get what they need, which they're crying out a lot for. And one of the reasons is, I think the Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey just came out. I haven't looked at it, but I heard news reports of it. And kids are crying out for help right now in ways that they hadn't previously. And I think that we need to look at that, and I think Scott's right. Maybe we should look at as to whether that's an education fund expense or whether it's a general fund expense.
Yeah, and another area that struck me, if I can remember it, little mental lapse here,
well, we have others.
Is that cliffs have always bugged me. It seems that we create these ideas that when we first put them in place, are really good. Then over time they deteriorate because the fixed dollar amount, you mentioned the $47,000 circuit breaker, that hasn't changed for as long as I know.
No.
And situations have changed. Inflation is a fact, and we should have built in an inflation factor years ago, and so that's an issue. Another thing that struck me about your comments is that Act 60 was great in many respects, and in particular, addressing the concerns of the Supreme Court's decision, the Brigham decision, in the difference in wealth between property wealthy towns and property poor towns.
Correct.
So the interim step that you're talking about, the 47,000 and the
90,000,
the 90,000 cliffs, they don't seem to me to address what I think is a more current problem, and that is that while Act 60 has brought a lot of equity with regard to property wealthy and property poor towns, it's now income wealthy towns versus income poor towns that are the discrepancy, that there's still inequity in our school funding system. Is it enough to revisit Brigham or not? I don't know. I don't think there's currently a lawsuit in process, but there is still discrepancy between. And that discrepancy, I think, is driven more by the income wealth of a community. So is it your notion that by moving to an income-based system that it would create a more equitable funding system for schools? Is that part of the thinking?
Absolutely. I mean, we think that income is the best measure for ability to pay. And we've heard over the years that income is too volatile, but it funds the general fund, which is about, I think, 3 times the size of the education fund. So if it's volatile, it works for the general fund. It should also work for the education fund as well. Around the edges, it may be volatile. You or I might have a great year or not so great year on our income, but in the large, the income tax is very stable and works for state government, if you will. And when it relates to, we do think it's a great measure to pay, the ability to pay, and I think that would make it a more equitable system, yes.
All right.
Hopefully, and I think that's our design to, I agree that the disparity right now has changed. We used to joke about it in our office about being elevation, right? Pre-Act 60, your taxes were dependent upon your elevation. The higher you went, the lower your taxes because you were more likely to be in a ski town.
Yeah.
And that was not fair, and the Supreme Court noted that, not in those words, but, and so now we have, what has been described by some as the most equitable funding system in the country, but it's gotten a little bit out of skew, and we think that it needs to be adjusted, and then also that we think there's actually even a better way to go about it.
So you made an allusion to the complexity of as Oliver Olson said in the meeting the other day, there's sort of a given in taxing that the fairer it is, more fair a tax system is, the more complicated it is, and that can be applied to our current education funding system. It's incredibly complicated.
It is.
Would an income system be less complicated? I'm not sure. Wouldn't you have to have a different income tax for every municipality or every school district?
Well, I think that Oliver does a nice job. Oliver Olson does a nice job of explaining briefly what the more equitable, the more complex it has to be. I don't necessarily agree with that premise. I think the income tax works quite well right now, and I think that for general fund obligations, and I think that it's a much simpler way to go. And just chatting the other day with the Public Assets Institute folks, they were very convinced that this is the simplest way to go about funding for public education, and I think that they know a whole lot more about it than I do. Maybe you could have them on. Steph, you might be willing to come on, but it's income tax can and it is a very simple method. You pay a percentage of your income, period.
Yeah.
And so that's versus my property, and maybe I have a home site, was it 2 acres, and I've got 10 acres thereafter. You've got 2 taxes on one piece of property, and is it contiguous? I mean, it's really complex. Versus my income, I know what it is, and I just pay a percentage of that.
Well, you know what it is after filling out a somewhat complicated form.
Well, that's not going to change or differ, but
Right.
With this proposal, you've got to report what you have to report to the tax department.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
we all have to pay our taxes.
So let me flip the switch for a moment and talk about the expenditure side. Are we spending too much in schools?
No, I think that we are spending. Well, I mean, I think school boards, superintendents who propose budgets, and school boards who examine those pretty well, the education budgets that are voted on in the spring are the most examined and scrutinized budgets in the state of Vermont. No other budget in the state gets that much scrutiny, and so I don't think we're spending too much. I think what we're doing is meeting the needs of students, and those needs have changed and grown. And other places in state government have not kept pace, and we've added things to the education fund that we're paying, above the line, if you will. So it adds up in some cases, and so we think that we need to look again at what is coming out of the ed fund and examine that better and more thoroughly to make sure that we are paying for education. But as to the local school budget that's being proposed by your school board and your superintendent and your other administrators, I think they're saying, this is what we need to run our schools. This is what we need to do to educate our kids. And that's what they're, I trust them that they're not spending money unnecessarily.
Yeah, so I wasn't really questioning that. My notion is that, if you're supporting a high school that is trying to deliver a quality education to the students, so you're running programs that are, 5 kids in advanced AP calculus is an expensive proposition. The school board is loath to cut a program because they want to deliver quality education to their students. So I agree that the schools and the school boards are being very cognizant of the amount of money they're spending and being careful to spend it properly. Do we have a system that requires them to spend too much money? And mental health is part of that. Isn't the fact that the state has not supported maintaining our structures in the state part of the problem? Is it that we have too many school buildings that we're trying to support?
Well, I'll give you an example. So I think it was when you were in the State House, we created the dual enrollment and early college system. And so this summer I met with a couple teachers who were saying, look, this system is really pulling a lot of kids out of our school that we don't get credit for educating. And so suddenly these are, 10, it might be 10 or 15 kids out of a school that are going to early college. That's awesome for those kids, but what it's doing is driving up the per pupil cost for that school. So we've created a system now. We're running, 2 or 3 different systems with which to educate those kids. So the per pupil costs have gone up dramatically in those schools that are losing a lot of kids. Additionally, a lot of those kids are kids who are going to go to college anyway, and they're getting a jump on it, and that's awesome. And I don't want to take that away, but those are kids that are now not in school to be part of the yearbook committee or the Glee Club or other things, and so they're missing out. They are missing out, and their peers are missing out on their talents.
That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Probably not saying it very well. We've got a system that is inefficient because of dual enrollment, for example.
Early college, right.
Early college, or as I referred to, maybe we have too many buildings we're trying to support. These systematic problems are driving up per pupil costs unnecessarily. What would the system look like to be more efficient and do a better job for our kids?
So a year ago, now I'm on the Commission on the Future of Public Education. A year or so ago, I was on the school construction task force. I forget the title of it now. And there was much discussion then, and I now know that there's a legislative group that met this year. I don't know if they've issued their report yet, but we were discussing a year or so ago the notion of newer and fewer. So we've had a moratorium. We haven't been funding school construction aid since 2007. That's a long time and a lot of deferred maintenance for schools, and we know that schools are crumbling, that the boiler systems are breaking, roofs are leaking, and things need to be fixed, but there's no state aid for that. And we were in agreement with that report, the notion of newer and fewer, and that was built into that report a year ago. So could we be delivering education more efficiently? Yes. But one of I think the ways we can get there is creating incentives for school communities, if you will, school districts, to say, for example, if you had 5 schools that all need repair, the state would give you an incentive to fix or replace 2 of the 5, and bus differently the kids. And you might more strategically locate the school. I don't know what would you do, but I think that school construction, along with what everybody's talking about is consolidation, could be a very effective way to entice communities into losing.
Yeah, incentives. I don't know. We tried 2 incentive programs before Act 46 to get communities to unify their governance structures, and it wasn't until it was mandated by the state that it actually happened.
But nobody's looked at whether Act 46 worked. I mean, my memory of Act 46, and you were there and I was there both in the State House, but Act 46 was a bill designed to offer educational opportunities to students, more educational opportunities. There was a discussion about why is it the rural schools didn't have what the schools in Chittenden County have. And so that was the notion behind it. The undercurrent was all about consolidation and of governance and saving costs. But nobody's examined the stated purpose, which in Act 46 says we don't intend to close small schools. It's very stated up front in the bill and in the law. And then nobody's examined whether we've offered more kids more educational opportunities after Act 46, and nobody's examined the undercurrent, which was cost savings. So I think we should examine whether Act 46 did what it said it was going to do, which is offer more educational opportunities, and did it save money? And I think the answer is no.
Well, there's a preliminary report that, but I don't want to rehash.
Right. I mean, we talked about that before.
I brought it up because, since this construction committee, Burlington's building a brand new school, right?
Yes.
Colchester is asking, I don't know if it passed or not.
I believe it did, yes.
$115 million
Correct.
Rehab of the Colchester school, which does not have an associated technical center. Correct. South Burlington has, according to some people, is in desperate shape, right, and dilapidated and needs a couple $100 million, right? And Winooski recently spent a chunk of change, yeah, to upgrade their schools. You have Milton that struggles to pass a budget on an annual basis, and Essex Tech Center, Essex High School, which does have a tech center associated with it. So those are all within like 10-minute drive of each other. Milton maybe is a little bit far out, but my point being, the commission came to this notion that fewer and newer is a good idea, and subsequent to that, we have all these individual schools within a few miles of each other spending hundreds of millions of dollars to renovate their buildings, when shouldn't they be maybe there should be 2 schools, Burlington and Essex, because they have tech centers, and every kid should have the opportunity to go to a tech center, and turn the others into senior housing or some more useful and effective use. Wouldn't we save a bunch of money, A? B, or should I say A, wouldn't we deliver a lot more opportunities to our students? And then B, wouldn't we save money doing it?
Well, I hope we would. I'm not going to get into which schools we should or shouldn't close. Not what I think is my job at Vermont NEA.
No, of course
I think that those communities, if they want to have that discussion, can and should, and so that they can figure out locally what they want to do with their schools. You're right. Maybe somebody would want to examine how we rebuild and rehabilitate schools that need it and that are in close proximity to other schools that also might need it. So somebody could be taking a look at that. We used to, I think, have a much more methodical, again, prior to 2007 when we had state aid for construction, there was a lot more involvement of the state. We haven't, the Agency of Education used to do that work and they don't do it anymore, right. And perhaps they should have in that case. But as to closing schools, I think the communities ought to be involved, and it's a community decision about whether they repurpose a school, for example, to a senior housing center or something of the sort.
So I don't bring this up to be argumentative,
yeah.
Although it is. I just think in the sense that like Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman wrote in a memo recently, if it were simple, it would have been solved a long time
Correct.
ago. And the fact of the matter is these are extraordinarily difficult conversations, whether we're talking about financing, moving to Scott Beck's formula proposal or the NEA income proposal or some hybrid thereof, or whether we're talking about facilities or whether we're talking about how do we deal with mental health and pay for that. These are incredibly difficult conversations that people have their community, they have their niche, they have their power base, and they don't want to give it up. And so finding a pathway forward to solve this situation that we're in, and by the way, do a better job educating our students, seems fraught with difficulty.
It is difficult. I mean, Lieutenant Governor, I'm not sure I read that piece. I've heard that before. If it were simple, we would have solved this long ago. And you were in the State House, and you know how complex it can be. So I, as you pointed out earlier, Scott Beck talked about mental health. I think there's common ground there. I think the governor in the spring said something in effect of he thought we should look into income tax as a way to pay for education. So I think there is common ground to be had, and I think we want to explore that with whomever it is who's willing to look at that deeply and thoroughly. We don't want to create more problems than we have now. I think one of the solutions...
We're good at that.
Yeah, well, humans are good at that, right? We put Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids. But I think that ultimately it's about educating kids, how we're doing it, and making sure that they get what they need so that they can be successful citizens down the road and be productive members of this community as adults. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I know my members every day are in working with kids, trying to do the best they can to meet the needs of students. Yeah. And those are more and more and more complex in ways that when I was in school, and they just weren't. We treated students differently back then, and I think we've come a long way in a positive direction.
Yeah, and just should kids have cell phones or not? I mean, it just gets really difficult. Just about any topic you bring up. I applaud you and your work at the NEA, being focused on kids first, and the staff that educate the kids, because it seems to me that almost everybody I talk to, a large part of their motivation for success comes from a favorite teacher they had.
Yeah. And
I know for me it was my physics teacher that I had in high school. Am I a physicist? No, but that teacher motivated me to be involved and to think and to use my brain and to do good things. And I think that's common with a lot of people. So it's your people, your teachers that are members of your union that are doing this on a day-to-day basis. And
well, I would say could not agree more, and I'll just say also it's very personal, as you know, as a teacher yourself. Yeah. My teacher was 8th grade, Mr. Carrington, and my best friend Sean. It wasn't his favorite class, I'll just say that. But Sean went on to become to the Naval Academy, captain of the nuclear sub. He did quite well, and just because he didn't hit it off with Mr. Carrington and I did, does not mean that Mr. Carrington was a great teacher. It's such a personal relationship.
Yes, it is.
Between a student and a teacher.
Yeah.
And some teachers hit it off with certain kids and others with others, and that's what we want. So having caring, committed adults involved in the lives of students in a positive way is nothing but good, I would say. And indiscriminately, arbitrarily establishing numbers or ratios in that regard about how many adults can and cannot be in a building, I think is a dangerous step in the wrong direction. I think local communities can and should decide how much they spend to educate their kids.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming here today.
Wow,
do you have
fast.
some closing comments about education and where we should go from here?
I'm curious where the Commission on the Future of Public Education will go. I support that, and I know there's going to be a lot of conversations coming up, as there should be and always will be, and we want to remain at the table working with people, whether we necessarily agree with them on all issues or not. We all, I think, are invested in making sure that Vermont is a better place and our students that are coming up are successful, and I think that's what we try to do every day, and I know my members are trying every day to do that. Yeah. So thank you for having me. It's a good show and interesting, and conversation will continue, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
And that's it for today's version of Sharpe Takes. Thank you very much for watching.